Hello, hello. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everybody. Good evening. How are you? It's good to see you in person for our second session that's in person here. A quick reminder, I'll say it a lot of times, but please sign in with the QR code up here. There's some signs on the side as well and in the back. If you don't have a device with you, we have a paper sign-in in the back. So as always, our session is brought to us by generous support from folks across campus, the Sustainable Food Systems Initiative, the Center for the Education of Women, the Residential College, Dr. Kyle White, the Latin American and Caribbean Studies Center, the School of Public Health, the School of Environment and Sustainability, and the Department of American Culture. Our teaching team includes Shakira Tyler, myself, and Lily Fink-Shapiro, as well as our larger GSI team, Megan Gross, Naixi Hernandez, Kimmy Vandewedge, who helps us coordinate, and Chris Tyler, DJ Cite, who was our LSA tech support. A reminder, this is free and open to the public, so we want you to share this session, other recorded sessions. The Q&A will be at the end of our session, so make sure you're taking good notes, writing down a few points. If you are a community member that's attending today, first of all, welcome. Second of all, we have optional readings that are available to you at the SFSI website. A reminder that you can follow along on Twitter with hashtag Food Literacy for All at SFSIUM. Usually we do poll questions for attendance, but today we're doing things a bit differently, so your poll questions will just be a show of hands. So we are counting for attendance via the QR code sign-in, or again, if you don't have a device with you to read the QR code, we have a paper sign-in and back, so please make sure you do either of those options. And as always, our session is filmed and will be available on the SFSI website. A few kind of course reminders. As you all may be aware, GO is striking at this moment. Our GOs are doing this in part because of wage increases, but there's a lot of good information on our Canvas site, both from the university and from the union, the GO union, in our announcements. What do our GSIs do? Quite a bit, including attendance, participation, answering your emails, answering questions about content. We do not know how long this strike will last this time. Our last one in 2020 was 3 or 4 days. We've seemed to have exceeded that. So we don't have any information on how long it will last, but we do have some course adjustments in light of these events. First is, of course, that all future quizzes will be postponed until further notice, so that means you do not have a quiz this week. Our participation and attendance will be collected, but grading might be delayed. Course communication, so before you reach out to me, your first step is to go to Canvas, frequently asked questions for our capstone, our teamwork guidelines, our syllabus. Your teammates are often a good resource, but if you have any questions outside of that, please contact me directly via Canvas Messenger. It's really important that you do Canvas Messenger and not email. That's the one I'm checking most often, and please give me a few days at the very least for a response because we are adjusting things. So again, no future quizzes at this time. Those points will not, of course, count against you in your course total. We are collecting, but grading will be delayed for your attendance and participation. And course communications are all funneled through me. So, the last few weeks, if you had a question for a GSI, those are now going to go toward me and Canvas Messenger. A few announcements about events happening around campus this Thursday. I will be in conversation with Marsha Chatlin about her book Franchise, which is about the imposition really of McDonald's into urban neighborhoods and black neighborhoods. So we'll talk about that as well as the role of food and black studies more largely, and that is a virtual session this Thursday at 4 p.m. Also this Friday, there's a talk at 2:30 p.m. in Dana 1040, so that's actually where we had our Fast Food for Thought, promoting soil health management for enhanced agronomic performance and ecological function. Also next week, our last kind of big content section will feature Diane Glaive. So that's April 11th, Rooted in the Earth, Reclaiming the African American Heritage. So that will be back to our virtual sessions next week. And then after that, we have one concluding session. Also next week is a Sustainable Food Procurement Conference. That's Monday, April 10th and Tuesday, April 11th, which will be at the Michigan League and the Michigan Union. Okay, so I just want to reinforce a few course announcements again for those who just walked in, or just reiterating. We will not have a poll for today's class that counts towards your attendance. You have to sign in with the QR codes, and on the left and right side of the room, there's one in the back. There's also one in the front door of the classroom. So please do make sure you do that sign in. There will be no quiz this week, but there will still be regular participation via Harmonize, which you can begin at, I think it opens up around 7:50 p.m. This evening. And all course communications, again, come to me through Canvas Messenger. Okay, I'd like to introduce Shakara, who will then introduce our speakers for this evening.
Thank you, Jessica. Peace, everybody. So happy to see your faces and Zoom screens. Feels good. So I'm going to quickly introduce our speakers, and they're going to give a more extended introduction as part of their presentations. Kiki Louya is a chef and restaurant consultant, born and raised in Detroit. She's the former executive director of the Restaurant Workers Community Foundation, and she's been in food and nonprofit work for 20 years. Ederique Goudia is a chef and food activist, originally from Wallace, Louisiana, and she's been in the industry for about 20 years. So if we can give a lot of love and beautiful, beautiful energy to our speakers, please do. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Hi, everyone. Hello. So I am Chef Kiki. This is Chef Ederique. We call her Chef E. We're really excited, first of all, to be here today. 20 years ago, side story, 20 years ago, I had class in this very classroom. And it's really, really kind of serendipitous to be back in this way. So we're excited to talk with you a little bit about what we do in Detroit, in restaurants, and we're going to talk about the history, the present, and also what we can expect, hopefully, in the future of restaurants. But first, we want to kind of get a little bit of by the way, I should stop here. Our talk is called Equity Matters, the Rise, Fall, and Future of Detroit Restaurants. And we want to start with a little bit of a poll. Now, before you scan the QR code, how many of you, and also, there's no right or wrong answer, but how many of you have been to Detroit? It's like everybody.
Most of everybody.
How many of you have eaten at Detroit restaurants? Just about everybody. Okay, I love this. So what are some of your favorite restaurants? If you guys just want to raise your hand, we'll call out.
Yes.
Go ahead. Ema,
Yeah.
yeah. 1,000%.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, right behind you. Yes. Yum Village,
Yeah,
yes.
good one.
All right. Marie, Akelo?
How about fair?
Yes.
Yes. Oh, you're naming all the good ones.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Pharmacy foods.
Oh.
Yes. All right, Chef Phil.
Go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Detroit Shipping Company.
Ooh.
Oh.
What particular restaurant inside Detroit Shipping Company?
I don't forget what it's called, but the dumpling place.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
very nice. Anyone else?
Yes.
Avalon.
Avalon,
Oh,
yes.
Avalon. Yeah.
Institution. Yes.
Flowers of Vietnam.
Excellent.
Another great one.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you guys for sharing.
Well, you know you're good food, that's for sure.
That's right.
All right.
So here's a QR code. There's also a website. It is www.menti.com. If you guys want to go ahead and scan that, what we're going to do is ask just one quick question. And there's, I think, 3 different answers or 3 different sections to answer. So what words come to mind when you think of Detroit restaurants? When you go to this website, by the way, there's the code to enter. It'll lead you directly to the survey. And then we're going to kind of see what everyone thinks. We'll give you about 2 minutes. Oh, I love this.
All right. So it looks like The larger words, which is what a lot of more people said, is delicious. We have diverse, unique, and it changes as we're going along. Yummy. I see innovative. Mom spaghetti. I like that. Very nice. Very nice.
That's a good one.
Good food. Variety. Local. Tasty. Those are some words that are definitely coming across a bit bigger. They're changing. Good. Tasty. Yes. Local. Vibrant. Authentic. Unique. Innovative. That's a soul. I love it. Culture.
I see small business,
Yeah. These are great.
urban agriculture,
Varied.
up and coming, heritage. These are really great words.
Comforting. This is beautiful.
Authentic.
Yeah.
Okay. We appreciate this. As we said, there's no right or wrong answers to this, right? This is just everyone's perception of Detroit restaurants. And honestly, there is a lot, if not most things that I absolutely agree with myself. This looks fantastic. Local is a big one. Local, diverse, delicious. We're going to come back to this survey at the very end of the presentation just to see if these are still perceptions that we have at the culmination, right? So, oops. Oh, we'll start with me. Okay. So we'll do a little intros so you guys know where we're coming from, what we've done. Again, my name is Kiki Louya. I am a chef, an activist, a restaurant consultant, born and raised in Detroit. I was on Top Chef. That was a couple seasons ago. I didn't win, so spoiler alert, sorry.
You did an amazing job, Kiki.
I
You
did.
represented Detroit. Yes.
Thank you. But didn't win. I was also, as was said before, I am the former executive director of Restaurant Workers Community Foundation. So real quick about that, Restaurant Workers Community Foundation is an action and advocacy nonprofit. We work to better the lives of restaurant workers, and we also gave money to foundations and organizations, nonprofits, that were doing work along 4 different focus areas. So fair wage, mental health and wellness, racial justice, and also gender equity. And then I, of course, founded a few different food concepts there in Detroit. Folk, the Farmer's Hand, and Nest Egg Detroit. Nest Egg was a all-women-owned hospitality group, which under that umbrella was Folk and the Farmer's Hand. They were 2 mission-driven businesses. The Farmer's Hand worked to support our local agriculture, our farmers, and Folk also worked towards fair wage for all, to the best of our abilities. Fun fact, if anyone went to Folk, did anyone go to Folk? Has anyone been to Folk? I love that. Okay, cool. So back in the day when I was still a part of Folk, we had a bit of a fancy toast menu. I love fancy toast.
beautiful.
Don't let anyone tell you that avocado toast is passé. It is not. And I have a big library of fancy toasts, and that is my claim to fame.
Thank you, Kiki. As Dr. Shakara said, my name is Ederique Goudia. One, if you really are like, I really want to learn how to pronounce your name, anybody from Detroit knows about Dietrich first. So I usually just say, think of Dietrich first and just put an E in front of it. All right, so Ederique, but you can just call me E. Most people just call me E, and that's totally fine. So I did found a consulting agency called In the Business of Food, and it was really to fill a gap in a Detroit food system where there's really a large gap in providing resources specifically for food businesses. I have 20 years of experience in the industry, so best way to put that to use is to help other people start and build their businesses. So that's what I do, and that's what I've been doing for about 6 years now. Writing curriculum, teaching workshops and classes, doing one-on-one consulting, as well as one-on-one coaching. Just a couple years ago, I also co-created Taste Diaspora Detroit, which is another organization that is really designed to highlight and showcase the foods of the African diaspora here in Detroit. And then I'm the former lead chef for Make Food Not Waste. Make Food Not Waste is a nonprofit that's dedicated to keeping as much food out of landfills as possible. So we started an upcycling kitchen because there was tons of food that was ending up in landfills, but there's also tons of people in Detroit that are food insecure. So we figured the best way to kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone is to rescue food from farmers markets, distributors, manufacturers, grocery stores, and then have a team of chefs to create really delicious and nutritious meals to feed families that are facing food insecurity for free every week. So we're up to about 4,000 meals a week. and 2 kitchens now. So fun fact food about me is that I do make a pretty mean gumbo. I am from South Louisiana. I will say my mom probably makes a much better gumbo than me. However, she did say my gumbo reminded her of her mom's. So that's the best compliment I could ever have. So I will take, yes, I make the best gumbo, even according to my mom.
It's true.
Okay, so as Kiki stated, this lecture is really all about equity, and equity as it relates to Detroit's restaurant industry. So before we really get into what it looks like in the restaurant space, really just want to ask, how would you describe equity? Or what does equity mean to you, or what's your understanding of equity? And anybody can call out what you feel like equity is. Yes.
Everyone getting what they need.
Everyone getting what they need. Yes. Anybody want to add to that or have a different description or thought?
Paying attention to history.
Paying attention to history. I like that. Definitely. So I have a few different definitions here. So according to Merriam-Webster, equity is defined as a justice according to natural law or right, specifically freedom from bias or favoritism. All right, that sounds about right. Another publication refers to equity as the fair treatment for all people, so that the norms, practices, and policies in place ensure identity is not predictive of opportunities or workplace outcomes. Right? That sounds about right. Right? So is there a difference between equity and equality? Yes? Yeah? And definitely according to this graphic, there definitely is, right? Equality is everyone being treated equal, right? But thinking about what equity is that different people may need different resources in order so that the opportunities are equal, all right? And that's gonna be the difference between equality and equity. So we just really wanted to start this with a baseline of understanding of when we talk about equity, this is what we mean. Equity also can be described differently depending on what kind of equity you're referring to. So there is social equity, racial equity, health equity, and even food equity. So now we're gonna take a look at how do you apply equity to the restaurant space. So what makes a restaurant equitable? Anybody want to take a stab at that?
No wrong answers.
No wrong answers at all. Yes, go ahead.
Opportunity for back of the house to in front of the house, everybody sharing.
Yes, I like that. That's a great start. What makes a restaurant equitable?
Repeat what they said.
Oh, what she said was front of house and back of house, learning different positions and being able to work in those. Anybody else?
Yeah. Pulling tips
Mm-hmm.
between front and back.
Yeah. All right. So now that we're thinking about what it means to be an equitable restaurant, let's take a look at one of 2 scenarios. So in this scenario, the blue dots are white workers and the red dots are workers of color. In what ways do these 2 graphics differ? Can anybody see specific differences in these graphics? Anybody want to talk about what they are? Yes.
Okay, so, and this resonates with me because I used to work at a restaurant. You have the workers of color in the back of the house, and that is a thing. I work in Texas Roadhouse, and the majority of us were in the back of the house versus the, I guess, the more equitable representation will be the one at the bottom where it's more of a mix, the diversity between the white workers and the workers of color all throughout the front and back of the house.
Absolutely, yes. That is the main difference. It's the exact difference of what these 2 represent. Now keep in mind, this is really only looking at equity from the racial lens, right, from the lens of race. But because of this industry's kind of 2-tier wage system, the first scenario where you have most of the white workers in the front and most of the workers of color in the back, this really does create wage disparities that predominantly affects people of color. So this scenario is really just looking at equity from the lens of race, but there's a lot of different things that we really need to think about and look at when we think about whether a restaurant is equitable or not. That could be, who they hire, how they treat their employees, how they treat their customers, what the company culture is, who they source from, and who are their vendors. So those are all things that we'll take a look at as well. So the second scenario, everyone meet Renee Redzepi. So Renee Redzepi is the co-owner of the 3-starred Michelin restaurant Noma in Copenhagen. Noma is named the best restaurant in the world in 2010, 2011, 2012, 2014, and 2021. They have a predominance of seasonal and hyperlocal foods on their menu, praised for a strong connection to nature and holistic approach. Their employees are dedicated to the product development, innovation, fermentation, and foraging, and the interns are from around the world and they're all unpaid. So, looking at that, just the information that you got, would you consider Renee to be running an equitable restaurant? No? Why not? Anybody want to say why not? Why or why not? Unpaid interns. So I could argue that there's equality because all of the interns are being treated equally. They're all are unpaid, but you're saying it's not equitable.
What if they were getting a culinary education through this unpaid internship?
What if they were getting culinary education? So, of course, working at the best restaurant in the world looks really good on a resume. I mean, there's pretty much nowhere that you can go and they won't give you a job from saying that you were an intern at the best restaurant in the world. But when we think about equity, well, who can afford to not be paid? It's a very limited, number of people. Again, everyone could definitely benefit, and it would be beneficial for them to work, to be able to say that they've worked at the top restaurant in the world. But there also may be people that can't afford to not be paid. They have to take care of themselves or even their families. So yes, in that instance, is that equitable? Probably not. Any other comments? All right. So now that we're really looking at in what ways, now that we're thinking about equity from the lens of a restaurant in the restaurant space, now I really want to get into equity as it relates to the Detroit restaurant scene, all right? So we're going to take a look back from 2008, really some pivotal points in Detroit's food economy to kind of get us where we are now. So 2008, as we know, was the mortgage crisis, right? The 2008 recession compounded losses for Black families in Detroit as a result of both unemployment and housing foreclosures. That year, there were over 4,000 homes that went into foreclosure per month in Detroit. That was the highest in the nation. Manufacturing jobs, which of course is a large part of the industry here in Detroit, went down to 27,000, and 40% of the city's residents were officially unemployed. So what does that really mean for the food economy? Well, what that means is that when you have an industry, a very low barrier to enter industry, that means that you saw people that were struggling with unemployment and housing foreclosures. They turned to the underground economy to keep themselves afloat. So you have people that are selling dinner plates out of their homes, baking cakes and pies, even making barbecue sauce or hot sauce that they're selling at their homes and selling out their cars. And now they've kind of created, or they're a part of this cottage food business or cottage food industry, because they know they could go and buy a case of chicken wings for $60 and turn it into $500, right, to be able to pay their car note or be able to keep their houses out of foreclosure. So now you have where hardship has turned into opportunities for entrepreneurship. Then in 2013, you have Detroit filed for the largest municipal bankruptcy in history. Part of that bankruptcy included investments in what they like to call the building blocks of the city's long-term stability and health. So that investment really cultivated the growth of urban gardening and a growing number of both agricultural and food businesses. It also elevated access to food as central to placemaking. So there was a $130 million fund that was created to promote the city's economy by supporting those small businesses, which of course included restaurants. Also that same year, you had small business support organizations that were created, like Food Lab Detroit, the Build Institute, as well as Tech Town's SWAT City program. So now you have these, again, going back to 2008, where you have these residents who are just trying to stay afloat, kind of launch their cottage food businesses. Now they're actually receiving support to continue their businesses and bringing those businesses above ground. So in 2015, the investment really started with building Detroit's very robust small business ecosystem. Now, because of the cultivation of urban gardening, right, they made an investment in urban gardening. There were over 1,400 community gardens and farms, which of course increased access to healthy food. The growth of that small business ecosystem provided 225 resources to help Detroiters both start and grow their businesses. So now, again, these entrepreneurs, these new to food businesses, they now not only have the resources, but they have the city's support in taking their business from just being, selling dinners out of their house. Now they have the resources to be able to turn it into a food truck or create a product that's now being sold on grocery store shelves so that they can reach some type of financial stability. So now, through all of this really robust small business ecosystem, Detroiters are really starting to see the entrepreneurship as a better path to financial stability. 28% of Detroiters started to feel that entrepreneurship was a better path than just an established business. And then you have 51% of Detroiters that say that really both are equally good paths, whether that is an established business or being an entrepreneur. That actually doubled what Detroiters thought about entrepreneurship in the past. Now, in 2016, the Washington Post proclaimed that one of the country's poorest cities is suddenly becoming a food mecca. The New York Times wrote that what had been considered a food desert was now a culinary oasis. And even the National Geographic named Detroit as 6 unexpected cities for food lovers in the world. So you have this boom, right, of not only small businesses, but particularly food businesses and restaurants. And that is being recognized not only across the country, but across the world. You have James Beard Award-nominated chefs, Michelin-starred restaurants, that's coming to Detroit to be a part of this resurgence, but that is really, only kind of staying within those 7.2 square miles of downtown Detroit. You also have a lot of young chefs and restaurateurs that they now have access to really cheap real estate, and they want to be a part of something where they can really make a difference. So these chefs and restaurateurs, and even native Detroiters that were starting food businesses, they really wanted to work together to be a part of a greater mission. So what we were noticing for those that wanted to be a part of this greater mission, that this resurgence was really a commitment from these chefs and restaurants to operate their businesses that was really about the community. So what do we mean when we say, or what did they mean when they say they wanted to be about the community? Well, that really looked like what we call the triple bottom line approach. The triple bottom line approach, and as we know, when we talk about the bottom line as far as business is concerned, that's profit, all right? It is a for-profit business, it is not a nonprofit, so profits are extremely important to a business. What the triple bottom line approach says is that, yes, profits are important, but there are 2 other pillars that are equally as important to making money. One of those pillars is your environmental impact, so the planet, and the other pillar is your social impact, so people. So we have, not only do we have this resurgence of food businesses, but we have food business owners that are really looking at, yes, profit is important to me, but my impact on the community is just as important. And so they really looked at following this kind of triple bottom line methodology to how they operated that business. And that could look like paying livable wages and doing away with tip wages, hiring from the neighborhood in both front of house and back of house, that sourcing locally by supporting your local growers and producers, and even reducing your food waste by, establishing a menu maybe that for cross-utilization or really, that's just kind of to name a few. So we had, again, a lot of chefs and restaurants and native Detroiters that started to look at equity from the triple bottom line lens. So in 2018, a partnership between Allied Media and Food Life Detroit was formed to experiment as to what, not only what triple bottom line looked like in theory, but what it could look like in practice. And so in 2018, during the Allied Media Conference, Dream Cafe was an experiment in what an equitable food system could really look like by running a restaurant based on sustainability and equity and collaboration. So by highlighting and being led by people that were at the margins and the most under-resourced, so it was led and featured women food businesses, as well as members of the LGBT community and people of color. And it really centered those equitable practices around sourcing locally and ethically, paying livable wages to all staff, having a comprehensive food waste and composting program, as well as making sure that these meals were culturally appropriate, ethically sourced, that it was nutritious, and that they were accessible in cost. So yes, it was a really ambitious project. I was the operations manager. It was a really, really ambitious project. But we got a lot of great feedback about this experiment. It was really beautiful. Customers said they felt inspired, they felt seen, and we received a lot of media coverage for being able to put into practice what an equitable food system could look like. But in practice, there were also a few issues. And it really showed us how challenging it is to really be equitable from the triple bottom line lens. And so that looked like there were difficulties sourcing from small producers because we are sourcing locally. Sourcing from small producers without a solid distribution setup. There were difficulties with labor issues due to lack of resources and capacity. We also had some challenges managing waste responsibly due to the lack of infrastructure. And it was really hard for us to source ingredients that were ethical on a large scale, plus trying to maintain the integrity of the chef's recipes and their culture, and trying to keep it accessible in cost, and also purchasing seasonally. So these are some of the things that, as we continue to put this into practice, we realized that some changes needed to be made in order for it to not only be equitable, but also sustainable.
Okay, picking up there. So again, in 2019, there were kind of two sides to the coin. On the one hand, restaurants were doing really, really well, right? In the media, we were all getting a lot of acclaim, James Beard Awards, right? There was a lot of things going on, but at the same time, there was this article that kind of slid under the radar a little bit, and it was written by the food critic for the Detroit Free Press. And it essentially said that the restaurant boom is over. And the story it was an article that told a story about a restaurant that opened in January 2019 called Izakaya Katsu. And it was, has anyone heard of that restaurant, by the way? Right on, okay. Couple people. So I actually never got a chance to dine in it myself, but I did know of it. It was located in Woodbridge. It was near Wayne State University out in Detroit. It had a lot of promise. It was a 60-seat restaurant, and in this article, Mark Kurlianchuk said it was really busy. He was there several times. He had talked to customers. They were very happy with the restaurant. They had been repeat customers, and then 6 months later, it closed. So this is not necessarily a business that was operating under the triple bottom line principles, as far as anyone knows. However, this restaurant could only keep its doors open for 6 months, right? What this article really pointed to is that there were some other reasons why restaurants were closing, and there was actually a problem. He listed several other restaurants that ended up closing in a very short period of time, and essentially said, okay, hey, this problem comes from two big reasons. One is which there is an oversaturation of restaurants. So a lot of restaurants Same menu, new American, same price points, right? Catering to the same people, and it's the same diner dollars kind of circulating throughout the economy that we're all, as restaurant owners, we're all kind of in this competition to try to get. And I remember just personally when I opened Folk, it was 2018. We were big, right? We had a line out the door all the time. Business was booming. It felt great. And we were an all-day brunch restaurant, right? So daytime hours. The minute that another kind of similar restaurant, Ochre, in a different neighborhood opened, we saw some of our business go there. And we were wondering, what is going on, right? We didn't change anything. We're still doing the same very fancy toasts, still very, very good, but we saw business start to kind of trickle out. And it just happened consistently time and time again. Talking with people who had opened similar restaurants to us prior, Rose's Fine Foods, for example, Molly over there said, hey, well, when you guys opened, I saw my business decline. And it's just kind of kept on going. It was this thing that a lot of us were almost ashamed to talk about, what was really going on behind the scenes, which was that a lot of us were struggling. So seeing an article like this, most restaurant owners at the time were like, oh, wow, am I next? Okay, I've been open for a year. Is it going to be me? And what we weren't talking about was that of the ones of us that were adhering to this triple bottom line approach, the fact of the matter was that it was very, very difficult. We were making very, very difficult choices to figure out how we were going to stay open. So has anyone ever heard of prime costs in a restaurant? Okay, so we're gonna get into some restaurant financials in a bit, and I won't go too far, but prime costs essentially are your food budget, so your cost of goods, and then also your labor budget. Does anyone know, just guess on average, how much, percentage-wise, prime cost makes up in a restaurant's expenses? How much? 80%. Woo! Okay, wow. That's a great guess, actually. No, it's a completely great guess. Honestly, there are some restaurants that operated about that. I think at one point I was one of them. With a little bit of shame, I say that, but it's not a healthy number, but it happens, right? The more healthy number is about 60 to 70%. 60 is really kind of like the sweet spot. You want to hit that. And so if you're operating at 60 or 70, can anyone guess what your net profit margin is in a restaurant? Any guesses? I'll give you a hint. It's single digits. Okay. Yeah. Okay, we'll just stay there. Single digits. So about 5% is really great for a restaurant's profit margin. Okay, and this is like in your traditional restaurant model. This isn't even when you're adding on these things like everyone's being paid a living wage. This isn't where you're sourcing locally, right? This is just your average restaurant. That is what you make as a profit margin. So let's look into that. This is essentially, on the one hand, sure, there's some oversaturation. There were some widespread closures. We were all feeling that. At the same time, one of the things in that article that was really interesting was that the owner said his business partners and him were not from Detroit. Actually, I think his business partners were not from the country. They were shocked to understand what prime costs actually looked like in reality in the American restaurant model. And that's essentially what caused them to close. They had not budgeted for how expensive it was going to be to pay people, to pay for food, right? It was crazy to them. And that's essentially what led to their ultimate demise. So the biggest lesson here, one of many lessons today, is that equity comes at a cost. And this was something that, again, restaurants that were operating, this is pre-pandemic, we were all feeling this squeeze. On the one hand, with people, one of the things that was not said in that article but was widely experienced was that we had a lot of staff shortages. So people were leaving the restaurant industry. We're struggling as restaurant owners to pay them a living wage, right? Which is also, not an arbitrary number, but especially for restaurants, when we start talking about what is a living wage and we're starting to talk into double digits, right? $15 an hour, we are seeing our pocketbooks. We have no idea how we're gonna keep this up. You also, I think we mentioned earlier in the talk about front and back of the house disparities. So that wage disparity is very prevalent in restaurants and throughout the history of restaurants, where back of the house typically gets paid less wage, right? So like say $9 an hour sometimes, compared to front of the house, who might be at a tipped minimum wage, but depending on the restaurant could be taking home a lot more money. We'll get to how much restaurant workers make on average in a second, but that being said, there were widespread staffing shortages. People were leaving the restaurant industry. They were saying this work is really unsustainable. Fewer people were enrolling in culinary school. They didn't see why taking out a lot of loans, right, to go to culinary school, these very expensive culinary schools, CIA, et cetera, why they would then graduate and get paid $9, $10 an hour. They didn't even want to come into the industry to begin with. And I'd mentioned the kind of cost of fair wage, right? Front of the house, back of the house. As a restaurant that tried to pay a living wage for both front and back of the house, did tip pooling, it was near impossible. And then we're gonna talk about Planet. So with that, a lot of us who are operating under this triple bottom line approach decided that we wanted to make sure that we supported our local farms as best as we possibly could. The thing is, our local farms were also struggling, either to get access to land to grow on, to get access to water, right, various resources. As a small farm, they're not taking on subsidies, right? There's a lot of challenges that they're facing each and every day. And because of that, making the choice to support our local farms was very, very intentional and very, very important, right? We, as Detroit, which has one of the second largest urban agriculture scenes in the entire country, we want to keep that going. That is an economy, right? At the same time, the cost to support local was exponential when it comes to supporting these national kind of conglomerates like Cisco, like US Foods, right? We were paying, I'll give an example, I could probably get from Cisco, what do you think? Bag of greens.
Oh, easy. I mean, you could get like,
$2, $1.50.
easily.
I would pay some of my small farmers located a mile away from my store about $7 for the same. And so of course, how are you gonna absorb those costs, right? Do you want a salad? That's that expensive. Like, how am I gonna kind of twist your arm and say, hey, but look at who you're supporting? It was a lot of, like, it was a conversation that we were all having. This was something that we were doing because we believed in it, but it was also really hurting us in other ways. I mentioned access to land use and water for farms, and also the cost to support other small businesses. When it comes to profit, yes, we were in single-digit profit numbers. This is the traditional restaurant model, and there's also unexpected costs. So, example, around Halloween, I decided that it was gonna be a really fun idea to have my staff and I carve pumpkins. So we kind of put, some newspaper on a table, and we all carved these pumpkins, and we put the pumpkins outside of the restaurant, and it was really, really cute. And I loved it, and I love Halloween anyway. So it was a fun activity. It was a little bit of like a bonding thing. The next morning, I get a call from our landlord saying, hey, your window is shattered. Your front window is shattered. And I was like, what in the world is going on? He's like, there's a huge hole in this window. So our building was in a historic building, and these windows were also specially made for us and very expensive. So when I got there, someone had thrown a pumpkin through the window. The window cost $7,000 to replace, and I was crying. I still kind of cry even just thinking about it. It was, it was an expense that we just weren't ready for, right? We didn't have it like that. And so we had to do a lot of negotiation with our landlord and say, hey, could you help us out? Can you replace it? We were going through our lease trying to figure out if there was any stipulations about like who replaces the windows. It was this very stressful moment, not to mention there's a huge gaping hole in my window. How can I open? How can I serve customers who are sitting right in front of that window? These kind of added costs that you can't, if my cooler breaks, right? These are all things that you can't, you want to be able to plan for, but ultimately you don't have the runway in terms of cash flow to be able to even make work. And then we hit COVID. So I've kind of painted this picture, right, of like what has happened pre-2020. These were all of the things that restaurants were facing. These were all things that we all faced equally, and this wasn't even just in Detroit, this was nationwide. We were all experiencing these things. So you can imagine how detrimental it was to have to shut our doors in March because of state orders, right, and because of COVID for an undetermined amount of time, right? No one really knew what was going on, what to expect. What ended up happening was that as we're closing, we also had to let our staff know hey, we gotta let you go, we gotta furlough you. We don't know when you can have your job back again. That's a really difficult thing and difficult conversations to have. I just don't know. And everyone is looking at the news, everyone's listening, to what Gretchen Whitmer has to say. Everyone's trying to figure out okay, this is probably 2 weeks long, right? Okay, now we're 3 weeks, right? Now we're a couple months in, what do we do? At the same time, restaurant workers became essential. When we finally were able to open our doors, right? Restaurant workers were frontline workers in that sense, where they were customer facing. They were kind of putting themselves and their bodies in sometimes very unsafe situations. There was a lot of safety concerns among the restaurant workers who came back. They weren't sure if this industry was even right for them anymore, and rightly so, a lot of them have left the industry permanently. They say, hey, I can do better elsewhere. There's remote work, I hear, right? I'm sure my skills would translate to another industry. This is just not for me. Farmers lost USDA funding. In some cases, there were some closures, and all of those closures hurt demand, not to mention it really hurt our supply chain. So the one thing that restaurants tend to do when we're working up, when we're doing things well, right, we're being consistent. We're offering you the same product every day in and day out, right? So if our suppliers don't come with that bag of greens that we were just talking about, then I can't plate your salad. I don't know what to tell you. After so many months of this, what ends up happening is that customers start to lose faith in restaurants, right? Can you guys actually, and then they start going to other restaurants. Can you do what you said you were gonna do? Can you do what you said you were gonna do? On top of that, our hours are going up and down and up and down. The reason is not because we want to be up and down with our hours, and I don't wanna be closed on a Friday. That is the worst time to be closed. I don't have the staff, I don't have the food to be able to supply you with what you need on a Friday, therefore I have to close. And so, we're not out of the pandemic, right? But these numbers were taken in early 2022, so last year. This was the reality at that point. I'm sure that there are more updated numbers at this point, but last year, you had 86% of restaurants experienced a decline in indoor dining sales. These are national numbers, by the way. This isn't even just Detroit, this is national numbers. You have 61 reduced hours of operation, 31 reduced seating capacity, some never even brought it back. 59% accumulated additional debt, we'll get to why. 47% fell behind on expenses. I honestly believe, actually, it's more it's probably in the 80s or 90s, but you're right, it's okay. And 78% are less profitable now than they were pre-pandemic. Okay, the other thing that the pandemic illuminated was that not only as restaurants did we realize that we had this broken system, many of us knew this for a very, very long time, right? Again, pre-pandemic, we were already hurting, we knew something wasn't working, but now customers were becoming aware of all of these inequities that existed within the restaurant model, right? Something wasn't adding up. We weren't doing what it was that we were supposed to be doing, and these are why. So this is just gonna talk a little bit, there's a few slides about some of these inequities that we found within the restaurant industry. And these are, again, national numbers. So I'll start with the question. This is average restaurant worker wage on a national level. Does anyone know how much hourly that is? Is that a confusing way of asking that question? It seemed very backwards. Does everyone understand what I'm asking? How much do restaurant workers make hourly on average? This actually is tipped, so front of house. So close, that's tip minimum wage. So for those who didn't hear, $2.50, that is sub-minimum tipped wage, right? So that is what you are guaranteed. Tips are not guaranteed. I could have a whole conversation about what is wrong with tipping culture, but we'll save that for a different conversation. Yeah, but yes, exactly, to your point. So what you're guaranteed as a restaurant worker is $2.50. On average, the restaurant workers make $13 and some change, like I believe it's $13.18, so $13.18 per hour. Also realize when we talk about restaurant workers, it's not a monolith. So restaurant workers could be working at Selden Standard, Joe Muir's. They could also be working at Denny's, Applebee's, right? Taco Bell. So this is all of restaurant workers that we're talking about, right? So it kind of spans the gamut. If you're working at Selden Standard or Joe Muir's, you're probably making a little bit more than $13.18, right? Or $2.50 as a sub. And by the way, does everyone understand what I mean by saying sub-minimum tipped wage? Yep, okay, cool. Should I explain? Yeah, okay, I'll explain. So sub-minimum tipped wage is the minimum amount that tipped workers have to make. That's guaranteed to them that as a restaurant we pay out. Anything else they make is tipped. All tips are subjective, so you are not guaranteed a certain amount beyond that sub-minimum tipped wage. In Michigan, $3.15 now. So that's what and also restaurants who pay above that get a tip credit. But essentially, yes, sub-minimum tipped wage that's what you're guaranteed. So I'll get into tipping culture a little bit because I think we have a little bit of time. So for example, tipping is subjective because, hi, I'm a black woman, right? And that's what I identify as. And I say I'm your server, right, at a restaurant. On average, women of color who actually make up most of the front of the house workers make less than half of what workers of white male workers make, right? On average, via tips. There's a lot of things that people make assumptions on when it comes to tipping, and a portion of it has to do with food and your service, right? That's ideally what people should be tipping on, right? Is like, how well did you serve me, right? And so you go above and beyond, and you want to make sure that like you get all the tips you possibly can, because that is how you pay your rent, you put your lights on, right? You pay your cable, you pay your cell phone. Unfortunately, there's a lot of assumptions, right? People might not like the way that I talk or what I'm dressed like, or maybe they just don't like me. Maybe they prefer to have a different server. Maybe there's other biases that they have towards me as a black woman. Maybe they had better service with someone who didn't look like me, right? You bring biases to the table every single time you eat, and a lot of them we're not always conscious of. But the tipping dollars, right? It should never come out that way, but 9 times out of 10, they always do. That's my little soapbox on tipping for now. All right, supply chain challenges. So again, we talked about the cost of supporting local. It wasn't just local farms, right, who were having supply chain issues. There were a lot of large farms that were like, hey, I can't get you what you need. Those were issues that we've been dealing with for a very long time. COVID only exacerbated them. Global shortages, right? Inconsistencies in delivery, in products. What does that mean for the restaurants? We had to have shorter menus. If we can't get our products, this is why a lot of you probably during the pandemic, once restaurants did open, saw that maybe your favorite food items, avocado toast, were striked from menus, okay? Increase in costs led to a lot of customer dissatisfaction. So this might be, and this is a very safe space, there's no judgment here. Has anyone since the pandemic, so let's say since March 2020, had a not so great restaurant experience? Raise your hand. I have. Okay. Out of the people who said yes, how many of you went back to that restaurant after that experience? Right on. Okay. Thank you for being honest about that. Also, I did not sometimes. Yeah. And then pandemic relief outcomes. So this is a big one, and I'll try to kind of go through it as best I can. So everybody has likely at this point heard of PPP loans, right? We've also heard that restaurants were getting PPP loans, as were a lot of other businesses. Unfortunately, there were a lot of systemic issues when it came to who got PPP loans, right? And there still are. But black business owners, and these are some stats, black business owners were 5 times more likely to not receive any PPP funding as compared to white-owned businesses. 79% of those white-owned businesses received all of the PPP funding that they asked for, while only 43% of black-owned businesses experienced the same. And this was also based largely on inequities in the qualification criteria, right? So for example, some black-owned businesses are run by 1 or 2 people, right? We don't have a staff of 20, of 30. We don't qualify, right? Other systemic barriers left fewer resources, as we said, for African American and Latin-owned businesses. This is still going on to this day, right? And unfortunately, a lot of the black and brown businesses that weren't able to get any PPP funding, which by the way has not been relieved yet. So people who are waiting for it to, just kind of be waved away with a wand are still waiting on that. So they don't even know what their fate is in the next month, 3 months, 6 months, right? A year from now. But a lot of the black and brown businesses had to still keep their businesses afloat, so they turned to their own personal debts, right? So what can I put on credit cards? What can I take a small loan out? What can I do a cash advance for? How can I essentially leverage myself personally to make my business stay open and to feed my family? Here comes the hospitality dilemma, okay? So this is a good part of the conversation because we're going to start to give some examples of how we can overcome these things or how we've seen people start to kind of take these challenges head on. But essentially what's going on is like, okay, as restaurants, we could do one of 3 things, right? We could increase our prices, which means that we put that cost on to the customer. Someone has to take it. It's either us or it's you, right? We can even do a little split, but like there's obviously going to be cost to paying people better, whether it be ourselves, our farmers, right, our workers. We could also absorb the cost, which means we're gonna cut labor, we're gonna reduce menu offerings, or we're gonna have some creative pivots. There we are. Okay, so did anyone read these? We sent some articles over. Did anyone read some of these case studies that we sent over? Okay.
A few, yes.
All good, all good. We're gonna explain them now, thank you. So these are 3 case studies. So these are 3 Detroit businesses that have essentially decided to embark on some creative pivots we find to be really interesting. And one is Rose's Fine Foods. So Rose's Fine Foods is a diner, or was a diner, I guess still is a diner, for all intents and purposes, located on the east side of Detroit. Rose's had a bangin' brunch. Like, I had a great brunch at Folk. Rose's, that's where I would go to when I was not at my restaurant. They were an amazing place for brunch. They were always busy. True diner style, had been open for longer than I had. Molly was one of the owners, or is one of the owners of Rose's. And Molly, throughout the pandemic, was like, okay, one of those restaurants that had to close. Rose's was also pint size, like really tiny. 25, 30 seats maybe?
Yeah, at best.
At best.
20, yeah.
Like 20 counter seats. So when she could have her doors open again during the pandemic, how do you seat people in a space like that safely, right? If I have to have a person in between me or plexiglass up, you lose your seating by at least half, right? If not more than that. So at that point, how can you even turn a profit? How can you keep your revenue going with only half your restaurant being able to be served? So Molly started thinking about, okay, well, can we ever really go back to how we used to be? A lot of restaurants turn to this kind of like market like new models. So they took some of their space and they turned it into this like grab and go counter, maybe a little bit of like vegetables, maybe some beverages, and it was a little bit more grab and go. No full service, no servers coming to your table serving you. Molly was one of those. And then one day she realized, okay, let me really think about what my passion is. Because is it running a full service restaurant again in the way that I have always known, or is there something better to this? And Molly has decided to launch a cooking school and a garden school. One of Molly's really good friends works at the Detroit Public Schools and does school gardens. And Molly has always been an avid supporter of small farmers in Detroit, way before a lot of us have been. Molly also is, I guess I wouldn't call her a farmer, but an avid gardener as
Definitely
well.
a gardener.
Gardener, and so this was a passion for her, and she realized it could also be profitable. This is a new revenue stream. Classes can bring in people. It's a captive audience, right? It's a price point, and so it doesn't matter how many seats she has in her space. If she can seat them for a class, she can figure out how she can keep her business going without having to revert back to essentially a model that she knew was not going to serve her.
So Bunny Bunny is really started as a pop-up space. They even changed their menu around several different times, really trying to figure out what was their next iteration. So pandemic, they tried to stay, as open as this pop-up in this specific space for as long as they could. Eventually ended up closing, and they thought that, it was done. We tried, we did the best we could, but ended up actually coming back at the beginning of this year to return to counter service. So counter service is a model that doesn't require full service. So it requires less people, which means less labor hours, and you can still be able to kind of adhere to somewhat of a triple bottom line approach by being able to pay people fairly and with livable wages, because you don't need as many people in your, to actually run your operation. So that's one of the models that Bunny Bunny has gone to since the beginning of the year, and they've had a lot of success with.
Okay, expansion. So a lot of businesses were thinking about kind of like, how can we be a little smaller, a little bit leaner, right? Run a business that we didn't need as much space. April actually took it in the other direction because it served her particular business model. April Anderson is the owner and also head baker chef of Good Cakes and Bakes, which is located in the Avenue of Fashion in Detroit's Northwest community. April has been in business for a very long time. April has been at the forefront of fair wage for longer than we were even having conversations, kind of as a small business ecosystem. And April also has had a lot of success in the media. She was listed as, what's the Oprah list that I can't remember what it's called right now? Oprah's list, good list?
Is it the favorite things?
Favorite things,
Yeah, favorite
thank you. Thank you. She
Bill
was,
Clinton is one of her
yeah.
customers every year.
Yep.
Yeah.
So April was on Oprah's Favorite Things. She has been on the Today Show, right? She essentially, during the pandemic, started a whole entire mail order business that now ships throughout the country. I think she was on Good Belly for a while. And April essentially was like, I don't know how we can keep up with this. Once you open the doors nationally, and you're on the Today Show, and you're on Oprah's Favorite Things, and I'm at a small little bakery, right? I've always been in this bakery. We've been fine with these customer interactions, but now I can't produce enough to meet the actual demand, so I need more space. And how do I do that? April ended up expanding. She found a building, I think on the west side actually of the city, and she's expanded. So now April has moved her production. That's her production kitchen. That's where she makes everything. Actually, I don't think she's there yet.
Yeah.
Let me not misspeak. She's not there yet. She is working on it. But essentially, it's going to help with the squeeze that she's feeling in terms of, like, it's a great thing to be busy. It's also a really difficult thing for your staff to shoulder when you're so busy, because you're asking so much of them to operate in a small space, making 2, 3, 4, 5 times the volume. So you start to really, really wear people out. So this is going to be a great thing for April.
So Kiki just really went through kind of 3 of those kind of creative pivots that we're seeing throughout the industry, particularly in Detroit. There are other changes that's kind of happening throughout the restaurant industry that I think that you all are seeing just as well as we are. Hospitality charges. So you're starting to see these added surcharges to your bill, which means that people are, trying to pay their employees not only livable wages, but they're really thinking about healthcare, worker-focused benefits, things like that. They're adding other services like dine-in as well as permanent grocery. So these restaurants are now turning into mini markets and mini grocery stores. And then, as Kiki mentioned, reducing the hours. So really looking at the sales trends and where they can really their sales can match their hours of operation. We have some that have turned into nonprofits or turned to some nonprofit work where there's this guaranteed income or revenue, as well as being open as a restaurant. And then, of course, this cooperative model of being worker owned or even community owned. We're seeing those changes as well.
Caught me in the middle of a drink. Okay. So in Detroit, we have been talking about this triple bottom line approach, the same one, people, planet, profit, for forever and ever and ever. At this point, we've realized so much throughout COVID, seeing our friends across the country have to deal with very similar struggles and figuring out how we're going to navigate it together. The truth is, I cannot tell you that there is one approach to this. It is not a one-size-fits-all thing, right? Not every business is the same. And so what works for one is not going to necessarily work for another, right? I was a daytime restaurant. There were nighttime restaurants. We have different revenue streams. We have different staff needs. We have different things to kind of worry about. We have different price points, right? Different cuisines. So what we do agree on, though, is that we need to revisit how we think about the triple bottom line approach. So instead of thinking people, planet, profit, we're thinking about impact, right? As restaurant owners, a lot of the times we put ourselves last, and then we're pouring from this empty cup, right? I remember in the very early years of my restaurants, I had not paid myself for over a year. I was struggling, struggling. I'm laughing at this because it's like laughing through the trauma, but honestly, I was struggling. And you know, you kind of think that you have this great plan of operations, you know exactly what you're supposed to do, but when it comes to someone throwing a pumpkin through your window or whatever, you have to figure, you're the one who gets to eat last, right? You're the one who has to figure out how to make it work, because above all, you have to pay your people when they need money. You have to pay them. So now we're starting to think about impact in terms of not only our community, right, and the worker, but we're also thinking about ourselves. How do we write ourselves into the business model for more sustainability? It has to be able to exist in operation despite all of the obstacles that are going to inevitably come at us. My walk-in's going to break, right? Someone's not going to show up. My supplier probably won't have my greens. It's okay. At this point, we're used to these challenges, but now we're better prepared for them. Sustainability is how do we guarantee the future? So we're thinking about how do we help our small farmers gain access to land. There was a huge issue in Detroit with black farmers having access to land that they've been farming on for years, right? It has to be an all kind of encompassing approach to how we make sure that we can guarantee that they have space to grow, that they are profitable, that we can pay them what they're worth, right? So how do we guarantee our future? And then, of course, success. So we've talked about a bunch of different ways that you can pivot. And really, I think maybe 2019, there was a pretty direct pathway to owning a restaurant in the traditional American restaurant model. You work in a restaurant, you probably start, I mean, the dream is that you start from dish, you work your way all the way up to executive chef, right? Maybe at that point, you start to write a business plan. You might go through Build Institute. They might help you write this business plan. You might get a loan. You might do a little Kickstarter or a Kiva loan, right? You might go to Michigan Women's Forward, get another loan, try to leverage as many things as you possibly can. In Detroit, you might go to Motor City Match, get matched with the building, right? Then you have to kind of figure out the renovations of that building. Finally, you open. If you don't go that route, maybe a food truck first, then to a building. But the idea was always to open a full-service restaurant that served people every single day and made a profit. Essentially, we're realizing that that is not the path anymore. The path kind of goes all which ways. It's all over the place. A lot of people who are doing pop-ups in Detroit say, I never ever want to own a restaurant. I have seen this. I don't want this. I love my pop-ups. I make good money doing my pop-ups. It's me and a partner or a couple of friends, like we're good. Some people say, I don't know, I just want a food truck, or I just want to do events, or cooking classes, or I want to farm. Some people have left the industry altogether. All of these things are still success if that's how we define it, right? If we feel good about these choices and we're making them together in terms of like being more equitable when we think about how we approach ourselves, our communities, our people, that's success. Oh, we're going to revisit the poll. Okay. Do you want to take this one?
Well, they got to click on the.
Well, no, I think we could redo the pool, but really I was thinking what we could do is just go through some of these words in this word cloud to see if any of your perceptions have changed about what you think about Detroit restaurants. Or does anything really stand out to you in terms of how Detroit restaurants have changed?
Or does anybody want to say if their perception, has anyone's perception changed since the beginning of this presentation? A few? All right.
Oh, yeah. We can also go into Q&A. We're going to talk about how we've also pivoted personally, but maybe this is a good time to just talk about Detroit restaurants in general and ask if you guys have any questions. Did you learn anything about Detroit restaurants or restaurants in general? Okay, good.
Do you have any questions? I think we have a question over here.
Yeah, and I'm going to toss you this mic. Yeah, this is a microphone. So if you, here, I'm going to pass it halfway and then you throw it on.
Hello?
Yes.
Hello.
Wow. Okay. So you spoke a little bit about culinary school and the cost of culinary school. I went to culinary school, but I'm actually a public policy grad student here looking at food policy. So one of the big thoughts for me always in a Southeast Michigan restaurant is it a waste for individuals to spend that money on culinary school? Do we look at the model of that, which I think would be more equitable? I am not any longer a chef. I left that a long time ago. But, I feel like there's a piece of equity lost there as well, which you started to talk about with the front of the house, back of the house concept. But I just wondering your thoughts on that.
Yeah.
There's absolutely a cost to, unfortunately, I don't think that any higher education is equitable. Well, I mean, it's very expensive. I will say that depending on what you want to do, it may be. What we saw when there was a decline in people going to culinary school, I was actually in culinary school at the time, and what's happening was as the economy got better, people stopped going into trades. And so culinary school was hard hit when the economy started to get better and people were starting to go back to 4-year colleges and universities. So I think it maybe depends on what it is that you want to do and also a sign of the times and what's it going to be ultimately important.
Can I add something to that?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I've actually had this conversation with a lot of chefs. I went to culinary school, you went to culinary school. Do I think it was worth it? I think in my particular, I'm happy I went to culinary school. I think it helped to formalize my training, even though I had been working in restaurants for a while. I didn't know the formal names for things. I didn't know the French names for things, right? At the same time, I have seen people have outstanding careers as chefs or in the culinary industry who did not have a formal training. The other side to that coin, though, is that some chefs say it legitimizes our industry, right? So a lot of restaurant work is not seen as being something to aspire towards. Right. A lot of restaurant work or workers are kind of looked down upon because we don't make a lot of money, right? And we're customer facing. So there's a lot of different, I think, perceptions of what a restaurant worker is. So the people who are in that pro camp are saying, well, it legitimizes us because we have an education that other people who are coming into the industry don't have, or people who are outside looking in. And so we deserve to be respected in that way. So I guess I'm in the middle when it comes to that. Yeah, great question though. Yeah.
Yes. We have another question.
Yeah.
Here we go. Ready?
We were going to throw it, but we thought it'd be kind of dangerous. So
Yeah.
we appreciate
My
it.
hand coordination is not the
So I think a lot of us in this room are college students, and I think a big part of it is we listen to a lot of these presentations and just want to know like how we as college students, or just like as we go into our industries, whether that be within the restaurants or not, how we can better support like our equitability in like the industry and just support like restaurants overall. So do you guys have any recommendations or like areas for us to like keep in mind as we're either dining or just supporting different restaurants?
Yes, that is a great question. Thank you for that. Do you want to start it?
All you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So, yes, there are many things I would say. I would say support, for one, the really easy thing to do is support the businesses that you know are doing things in a more equitable way, right? We saw that the cost of equity is very high and there's a lot of challenges. So one restaurant can't always do everything, right? They might pick and say, hey, I'm gonna support my small farmers, or I'm gonna support my staff and pay them like more than a living wage, right? But there are restaurants that exist in Detroit and here in Ann Arbor. Miss Kim's is one of them, right, where she has amazing fair labor practices. I believe Jihae has also started to do a pay what you can model. I don't know if she's actually launched that yet or if she's just thinking about it, but things like that. If you hear of a restaurant that's trying to do good, supporting their community, supporting their people, I would start there. Just go to them, right? It's a choice. I would also say there is a list as well called the Good Food 100, which you can look at. So there's good food restaurants that kind of have like a little seal of approval because they're trying to do things better in the industry. And if you see those anywhere, I would say go ahead and support that. I would also say, and this is again really basic, there are things that are not so basic, but really as just anyone who dines in restaurants casually all the time, treat your restaurant workers with respect. Please just do that. Please and thank you, be kind, ask how they're doing. As restaurant workers, we typically don't get asked how we're doing, even though we ask everyone how they're doing every day. You will be surprised if you ask someone how they're doing. They might be like, oh wow, okay, how am I doing, right? And kind of checking in with themselves. It's just a really nice gesture, but just treating people with respect. And that doesn't necessarily mean like being crazy with the tips, right? If you don't got it like that, you don't have it like that. You don't have to tip 40%, right? People understand. It's more about just how we treat each other when we're in a space and we're dining together and we're sharing this experience, because I think that restaurant workers are a lot of the times used to people not listening to them or treating them like they matter. So I think everyone deserves to feel like they matter, and that would be a really simple way to do it.
And then just to add to that, just keeping your biases in check. So being aware of some biases that you may have around restaurant workers, restaurant work, but also food and cultural food. So it could be where you're like, I don't understand, this is soul food. Why should I have to pay $25 a plate? But you know, that food contains ingredients that's coming from small local farmers, as well as food that's still not only delicious, but also nutritious. So checking your biases at the door is also a great way.
Thank you. That was a great question. Anyone else? We got some time. Yeah. Okay.
Hey, Kayla. Ready?
The handy microphone.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
In your presentation, you mentioned Detroit being the #2 urban farming center. I'm curious what's #1. A little offended, but.
City, so let me actually, thank you for that. I need to actually clear up my stat there. It's actually Michigan, not Detroit, but Michigan versus California as #1. And I don't know if on one of our slides said this, but Detroit has, at one time we had 1,400 urban farms and gardens. But yeah, it's Michigan versus California.
We're over 2,000 now.
I think Michigan
2,000?
second.
We're over 2,000 now.
Yes.
Yeah, Michigan is second in terms of diversity of agriculture to California. But I go with Akela on this, that Detroit is #1 for urban ag.
There we go. Anyone else? Okay.
Yeah, I think
This'll-
we have
yeah,
one
one more?
question. Yes.
All right, last question. Here we go. Ready?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I had a question about, you talked about that prime costs of labor and food.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering what percentage the cost for rent and other like structural things are, and especially like how that plays into people like getting their informal businesses off the ground, and like how that contributes, and especially in Detroit, and like what that scene is kind of like.
Such a good question. So, okay. The way that let me try to back into this question a little bit. So rent depends, because your rent can be structured in different ways depending on who your landlord is, honestly. If you can own your restaurant, own your restaurant. This was actually a part that I skipped over in the presentation, but it was pandemic-related rent increases. I'll talk about that in a second. But when I do my rent, I kind of bundle it into operating costs. So it's like a line item on my profit and loss sheet, or pro forma, depending on what I'm doing. Healthy number, like 10%, 10-12%. Would you say I'm accurate on that? Yeah. But
overall operating costs.
Overall operating costs. But those also include like other building maintenance, for example. It's sometimes you have like a triple net lease, and so you're paying for like a bunch of other things that are also included in your rent. So like general operating costs are all involved in that. So I do want to bring up something, because I think it's a really important question to talk about how rent and like rent fluctuations affect restaurants. And so during the pandemic, there were some landlords that got some grants, or just out of the goodness of their heart and their pocketbooks, were able to offset rent for restaurants. So it could be like a month or 3 months when restaurants had to close their doors and literally didn't have people coming in, so there wasn't revenue, right? Not everyone did that. And some landlords still demanded rent. But then the people who did do that, a lot of them had to also make up that lost rent. So some restaurants have seen their rents skyrocket because they're paying all of that back rent that they couldn't pay or didn't pay during that time. So of course that has detrimental effects. That's why you might be seeing different closures kind of going on. It could be rent related, it could be staff related, but rent definitely, when you start to see that number kind of creep up, it affects you.
All right, everybody, can you give our speakers a round of applause?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And everybody, we will see you next week virtually on Tuesday. Thank you so much.
Thank you.